Question: what kind of bear is best?
That's a ridiculous question.
False. Black bear.
Welcome back. Welcome to the first episode number 1 of the DC Cast. Welcome. Hopefully you enjoyed that intro. I love that intro. That's from a scene in The Office, the American version of The Office. I love it. I love that show. So I thought I'd put that in the intro. I don't know, something goofy and something funny. I was thinking of things to do for the intro, and so I decided to go with that. Hopefully it goes over well. Anyways, so a little bit before we get going here on what this podcast will be about. Anything. This podcast will be about everything and anything big happening in the world, anything sports related, news related. We're going to talk about the new Spiderman movie today, a little bit about Hernandez today, and I'm probably going to aim for about 20 minutes on each episode to start, just so people can kind of get a feel for what it's going to be like. I'm not really looking to move into the hour show yet, just because I want people to get familiar with what is going to happen and what the show is going to be like. You don't want to jump right into the hour-long shows without giving people a chance to really get a feel for what the show is going to be like. So, without further ado, let's go. Let's get right into our first topic. The first topic we'll talk about is the new Spider-Man movie I saw this week. This was The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. They've kind of gone back to that original Spider-Man, the one who's witty, sarcastic, and he kind of pokes fun at all the villains. And I enjoy that. I was talking to a friend, and we were kind of going back and forth about what he liked better. Did he like the original? Well, not the original, but the Spider-Man that came out in the early 2000s compared to the ones that have been released in the last 3 years here. And he said he preferred the other one, with Toby Keith. Toby, what's his name? Oh, I'm gonna have to look it up here. I'm pretty sure it's Toby something. 2002. Let's look it up. Tobey Maguire. So that's who he said he preferred. And I figured he preferred him because he kind of grew up with that Spider-Man. For me, that's the way it seems to happen. That's the way everything seems to work, is whatever you grew up with, whatever you knew as a kid is what you're going to prefer in your adult days, or if a new version comes out, you're always going to prefer that original, the first one that you saw. For instance, for me, James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, I believe, was the Bond in the early in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I prefer him over any other James Bond because I grew up with him, because he was the original, and it feels to me like, when I think of James Bond, I think of him. I think of Pierce Brosnan, I believe his name is. Because I grew up with him, and it was Pierce Brosnan, and that when I think of James Bond, I think of Pierce Brosnan. Whoa, what is going on? Sorry if you guys heard that, some ad or something. Anyways, so I went and saw the new Spider-Man, and I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. The way they have him as that witty, sarcastic version of Spider-Man, I like it because, for me, it adds that kind of real superhero effect. It puts that real superhero effect on it, because as a superhero, you're supposed to be able to dominate opponents, and a lot of the villains in Spider-Man are kind of genetically modified humans, or humans who are in suits. For instance, the Rhino at the end of Spider-Man was just in a big metal suit. But I believe it was the Lizard was his name in The Amazing Spider-Man 1 was just a genetically modified human. And it seems that the way Spider-Man has done it, the way they've built their franchise is that's how they've created their villains. It seems like an easy way to create villains because they have, for instance, Electro. He was one of 3 villains in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I'm just going to look this up here. And he was just another one of those guys who he fell into a pool and got electrocuted, and they thought he died, and he wakes up and what do you know? He's another villain, and that's just the way Spider-Man seems to work. That's the way they have it. That's just the way that's the way Spider-Man's done it. And I love it because you can have a never-ending supply of villains. Although they are still using real villains, but it just leads itself to more and more and more down the road if they were to create more villains. But I think what The Amazing Spider-Man is it's just another comic. I think Spider-Man itself was a comic, and then The Amazing Spider-Man itself was a whole other series of comics. And I think that's why you get the witty, sarcastic Spider-Man versus the Tobey Maguire, who is more. He had a little bit of it, but it didn't seem to be as much. And that's where you get the different villains as well as the different comics, because both comics had their own storyline. For instance, in Spider-Man, the ones that came out in the early 2000s, the Green Goblin was a big part in, I believe, in Spider-Man 1. That was the main villain. But in this one, it was, I believe the Amazing Spider-Man 1 had the Lizard. I think that was his name, the Lizard. And in a minor part in number 2, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, it had the Green Goblin for a short period of time. It had Electro as well, and I believe it also had the Lizard for, I believe he was the guy who died in the bed. So all in all, though, it was a good movie. They did it well. Unfortunately, I saw it in 3D, so it wasn't. I'm not a big fan of 3D movies, and here's why. I'll tell you why I'm not a big fan of 3D movies. When you're watching a 3D movie, 75% of what goes on in a 3D movie doesn't need to be 3D. They don't need very, very small parts of 3D movies actually lend themselves to being in 3D. Him slinging his web from building to building, that doesn't need to be in 3D. Maybe if a car comes flying at you, okay, maybe that's acceptable. Or if a building falls down. But if he's slinging his web, or a fucking loaf of bread or something ridiculous like that, let's be real here. 3D movies, it's just a money grab. Because I know for a fact, I took my glasses off for the majority of the movie just because I'm not a big fan of the way the 3D looks, just kind of, when he's walking down the street and stuff. I'm not a big fan of the way that looks. So for me, I took my glasses off. I don't like it. And there's scenes where it's perfectly clear, where it's legitimately not even in 3D. It's 100% clear. It's that portion of the movie is actually not in 3D. It is just a 2D, or I guess, whatever the regular movies are in. Is it 2D, I guess? But 100% not in 3D. And it's because it doesn't need to be. And in those scenes, the 3D movies, they cost twice as much as the regular movies. But that's how they make their money. People go and watch 3D movies, and they pay twice as much. There wasn't even an option to go see it in 2D or whatever the regular movie is. So, I don't know. That's my little rant on 3D movies. It's just, it doesn't need to be in there. There's parts, I remember I think I watched Spy Kids a long time ago, and it wasn't 3D. But the good thing of what they did there was, there was portions of the movie where it wasn't in 3D. So the big thing came up on the screen that says, please remove your glasses. It's no longer in 3D. We'll let you know when the 3D resumes and when to throw your glasses back on. So when the 3D parts did come back, they would tell you again on the screen, all right, time to put your glasses back on. This portion of the movie is in 3D. And if Spider-Man did that, I think it would be a little bit easier to get on board with if movies nowadays did that. I think it would be a little bit easier to get on board with the 3D because it doesn't seem like as much of a scam at that point. You know, they're telling you, okay, this part of the movie is 3D. You might get an action scene, so put your glasses back on. You know, it's something's going to happen here. But when you look at movies nowadays, I remember I watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre a couple years ago. There was one 3D aspect. An axe came flying or something came flying. One aspect in a 2.5-hour movie, one thing was in 3D that came out. It was the most ridiculous display of a 3D movie I've ever seen in my life. 3D movies are a waste of money. They're a scam because 75% of the movie isn't a 3D, doesn't lend itself to being 3D. So I like the way Spy Kids did it back in the day where they told you, okay, it's the 3D part of the movie now, you can put your glasses back on, or hey, this part of the movie's not going to be in 3D, you take off your glasses, it's just going to be a regular film for the time being. So that was my problem with the Spider-Man that I saw, but all in all, it was actually a really good movie. I really enjoyed it. The way they've set it up with Gwen being the new quote unquote Mary Jane, the cannabis, but the actor, she plays it well, and the way they set up the Electro, I thought they did a really good job setting his character up. He was kind of a guy who, a little bit of spoiler alert, but he was kind of a guy who was invisible to the world. He felt that nobody really understood him or saw him, and he really wanted to be seen. So one random day, he runs into Spider-Man, and he gets and he was a huge Spider-Man fan, and he runs into Spider-Man, and he feels like finally things are going right. You know, Spider-Man said, hey, you're my eyes and ears down here. Look out. And he was excited because no one ever takes the time to talk to him and acknowledge him. So then he becomes Electro and whatnot, and he finally feels that he has power and he's angry towards all the people, yada, yada, yada. He eventually takes over and goes crazy. I won't spoil the whole movie, but there was a little bit of a spoiler alert. So, hopefully I didn't ruin too much of that movie. But anyway, it was a good movie. I really enjoyed it. I recommend it. Spider-Man movies are always good. They always do a really good job. Marvel does a really good job with the movie. That comic lends itself to a really good movie. Not all superhero movies, I find, do the best movies. Not all best superhero comics do the best movies. I don't know, something about it. I think the Batman and the Spider-Man are the two ones that do the best. Just because, for whatever reason, that series of comics, that storyline, lends itself to good movies. I've never seen a Superman movie. Never seen a Wolverine movie. I just don't think those really lend themselves to movies. You know, I think those are probably better off as comics and cartoons. So anyways, that's my little Spider-Man section. Moving on, though, I also wanted to talk about Aaron Hernandez and his legal troubles that he's into again. For those of you who don't know, Aaron Hernandez was an NFL football player. He used to play for the New England Patriots. And he, last May, I think it was A year ago today, actually, May 19th. I think it was a year ago today. Wow. I'm looking back and I'm looking on my calendar. A year ago today, Aaron Hernandez was arrested. Geez, I'm thinking about that. It's blowing my mind. A year ago today, I believe it was a year ago today, he was charged and arrested for the first-degree murder of Odin Lloyd, and I'm sure you guys have heard about it, but I'll give it a brief overview. He was arrested last year. He was a professional football player for the New England Patriots. He played 3 seasons, 2 or 3 seasons. I believe he played 3 seasons with the Patriots, and it was released. They found a body, and it was linked back to him. He got arrested, I believe it was May 19th of 2013, for first-degree murder, held without bail. He's still there for that murder. But the big news is, about a week ago, he was indicted for a double murder in 2012. And 2 men outside of a nightclub were shot and killed. And up until about 2 weeks after he was arrested originally in May of 2013, that was an unsolved case. So what had happened was he was arrested originally in 2013 for the shooting of Odin Lloyd. Then things happened, different pieces of evidence came up, and they linked him to the double murder shooting outside of a nightclub in Boston in 2012. And they weren't really sure. It was kind of a loose connection at the beginning, but more and more things came out, and they have indicted him for the double murder. So I guess they have enough evidence to say that we know you were there. Whether or not you shot them or not, you were with the guys, you were in that car, that was your vehicle, and they have arrested him for it. So the reports came out saying that he stalked and ambushed the 2 men outside of a nightclub, shot, I guess, the 2 guys in the front seat to death, 2 guys in the back seat, made it out okay, but I don't know whether or not the 2 guys in the back seat didn't see him, or the 2 guys in the back seat, maybe they might have feared for their lives if they said anything to Hernandez. Because, things coming out now, Hernandez was around a lot of guns and a lot of what seemed to be bad people. He was, I guess, earlier in 2012, after the Super Bowl, after the Patriots lost in the Super Bowl, this had happened. This double murder had happened. And then earlier in 2013, he had shot a friend in the eye. Later in 2013, obviously, he gets charged for first-degree murder, and now everything's unraveling. Prison fights, more evidence is coming out. It just doesn't look good for him. He seems like he'll be in jail for the rest of his life. He's now facing 3 first-degree murder charges, and in Massachusetts, first-degree murder is life in prison. So he's got to beat 2 cases, 3 murders, in order not to face life in prison. But all the gun charges against him, those are a shoo-in. That's a slam dunk. He'll be behind bars for quite some time. I have no doubts about that, which I'm a huge Patriots fan, and it sucks because he was coming off huge seasons. The last season he played, he was hurt for 4 games, I believe. And with him and Gronkowski in New England, that was a tight end duo that could have lasted 10 years. That could have been something special, but yeah, Hernandez is now facing 2 more first-degree murders, and it doesn't look good for him. He's a little bit of a troublemaker, and a lot of things have now come out, and they were talking about just some funny, fishy interviews with the Patriots media after he had shot the 2 men in 2012 and in 2013. It just didn't seem right. There were things that former players in the Patriots had come out and said. He kind of marched to the beat of his own drum a bit, and he was just kind of an odd one. He seemed very private. That's what they were saying. He was very private, very to himself. So now we know what he was doing in his spare time. He was out killing people. So, but yeah, things happen, I guess, and people, for whatever reason, decide to do things. He just signed a $40 million contract. These things don't They don't happen to everybody, and it's unfortunate for him. The worst thing, though, that could have happened to him was getting drafted by New England. He grew up in Bristol, Connecticut, which is hours away from Boston. You know, if he was somewhere in California or somewhere farther away than Boston, you know, you could drive to his hometown in, you know, less than 2 hours, I believe. I think I'm not exactly sure how far Bristol is away from Boston, but that's the worst thing that could have happened, because he still had all those connections with his former friends. So it seemed like maybe he couldn't escape that life, and eventually things caught up to him. So, and he went all downhill after a few years in the NFL. But that's the new stuff on him. Unfortunate it is. I've been keeping up with it ever since he got arrested, and nothing good for him has come out of it. He'll be behind bars for a long time. Anyways, episode 1 in the books. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This has been episode number 1 of the DC Cast. Thank you for watching. If you liked, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and thanks for tuning in.